Hello everybody and welcome back to another Ghost Bear Gaming video. Today we are playing Gunfire Reborn, but we're not actually going to play Gunfire Reborn this time. I've been talking about how I wanted to do a video about the weapons in this game. So I think I'll do a kind of a brief overview of all of the weapons. And then from there I'll move into I might do a series of challenges where I have to, every time a weapon drops, no matter what it is, I'm going to pick it up and use it for a period of time, just so I can try and showcase every single weapon in the game, just so you guys can see, because there's definitely my favorite weapons in the game, and if I'm doing a hard run or I'm trying to accomplish something in a run, I'm going to stick to those weapons more often, but I do want to try and showcase every weapon and let you guys see all the different weapons that are in the game. So I have unlocked every single weapon, so I will go through and show you, just kind of give you my excuse me, just try to give you my thoughts on each weapon, just a brief overview of what they do, how they work, and go from there. So we'll start with the assault rifles, or rifle category that there is. The first one up is the cavalry. It is a gun that fires a 3-round burst, and the third shot auto crits if it hits. So you always get a critical hit with, no matter where you hit the person. If you hit them with the third shot, it automatically does a 2x crit. It has a 3-round burst, decent sized magazine, and if it is this elemental effect chance down here, that's if you happen to get one that whatchamacallit, comes with an elemental effect chance, like one of the inscriptions gives it elemental damage. It has a 14% elemental effect chance, so that means 14% of the time it'll actually inflict the elemental damage. It's not a bad gun, it's not a great gun, it's kind of mid-tier. If it's the only gun you've got, you can use it, it's serviceable, but there are much better guns out there, so it's not one that I ever use if I have to, or unless I have to, because I don't have a better one. Sorry. And then it does have a few exclusive inscriptions that are for it, that it will go through, so if you want, you can read through these on your own, pause the video or something. They're just basic generic ones, nothing specific to this gun. There's a few guns that have exclusive inscriptions that are specific to that gun, but all of these you'll be able to get on multiple different guns, so it's not like it's only to this gun. So other than that, we'll go on to the next one. So the next one is the Rainbow Arc. The Rainbow Arc is actually a decent gun. I like it on certain characters. I really like it on the Tiger, because it is a rapid fire gun that you can use for clearing small things. If you're getting swarmed by small fast moving things, you can use it as a rapid fire gun, but you can also hold down the secondary fire button and charge a shot and fire it, and it does a much higher damage shot, kind of like a sniper shot. So it allows the Tiger to have a sniper-like weapon without having to switch weapons. It's not as good as a sniper rifle in that regard, but it can serve the purpose, and it can be helpful if you're getting swarmed by a lot of fast-moving things that you don't want to have to. You don't want to have to try and keep firing your sniper rifle slowly at each individual thing. You can use this on rapid fire, and it helps clear out a lot of the smaller moving mods. Again, all of these are just basic exclusive inscriptions that are generic to most weapons, but it's a decent gun. I like the Rainbow Arc. If I get it, most of the time with certain characters will use it, unless I have something better. It'll depend on the inscriptions on it as well. If it's got good inscriptions for what I'm trying to do, I'll pick it up. So, but it's a decent gun, serviceable, well liked gun. Crimson Fire Scale is a very good gun. It's probably one of the easiest to acquire early on. You have to do something very minimal to get it, if I remember correctly. And once you get it, it's probably one of your most serviceable rifles that you can get. It's a good gun. It has a little bit of a an accuracy. If it's a base weapon without any accuracy buffs, your shots will sometimes spray a little bit if you're far away, so you gotta watch how you fire with it. But it's a fire damage weapon, so it has an elemental effect. It does good damage. It has a decent rate of fire. It's a really good gun. If you pick it up, you'll never have a downside to it. And its secondary rate of fires, once you hit five headshots with it, or five crit hits with it, you'll build up one of 3 shots which will fire like 5 explosive bombs that do do AoE damage out. It's like having a grenade launcher on the gun, which is really nice. So it's a very handy for clearing out rooms. If you got a cluster of people in there and you've hit a bunch of headshots, you can fire this and it'll do a lot of damage and take them out as well. So it's a very good gun. I like it. It's one of my favorite guns. It's very, very handy. Dragon Chaser. This is kind of an underrated gun. It's not... it's a decent gun. It's not my favorite gun because it's kind of just meh, other than the homing factor of it, but it's not as bad. I'm not a fan of the rainbow, which I'll talk to once we get to it, but this gun, at least, if you I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'll explain what it does. It normally fires straight and just in a row like any other rifle and has no difference, but its secondary fire is you launch a mark, and then wherever your mark hits, your shots will home in on that mark. So if you can land a mark on a critical point of an enemy, you can then just hold down the fire button no matter where you're aiming, and your shots will go to that critical spot. So it's decent in that sense, but it's kind of sometimes hard to, with people moving and enemies moving around, to get that homing mark to lock on. But even if you don't use that, it's still just fires straight, unlike the rainbow, which just, it's weird. I'll explain why I don't like the rainbow that much. But this, at least, even if you don't use the mark, if you're aiming at a headshot, you'll get a headshot. Even if you don't fire a mark, it will shoot straight with it. But other than that, it's kind of just a meh gun. Doesn't have the greatest damage, doesn't have the greatest rate of fire. It's not bad, it's not great. It's kind of just in the middle, kind of like the cavalry. It's not a bad gun. Oh, and I didn't go over the most of the rifles, if I remember correctly, don't have very much for any exclusive inscriptions. So, but yeah, so it's a decent gun, but it's not the greatest. The Hexagon, actually, surprisingly, is a gun I don't mind on certain characters. The Turtle being one of them. It's a fairly decent gun where after you fire 18 shots, you can hit the alternate fire button and you open up a shield, and then you can recast it to end the shield early, and when the shield retracts, it fires a seeking shot at somebody, and the damage of that seeking shot is based on how much damage the shield has blocked. So the more damage the shield blocks, the more damage the second seeking shot does when it retracts the shield. The nice thing about this gun, actually, that I don't mind about it, is it doesn't have very much recoil, and it's fairly accurate when it's shooting, and it's got a decent base damage of 110. So it's actually a decent gun. I don't mind it. It's a decent gun. It's helpful. You'll notice when you're firing it that this will start to it'll be not lit up, and as you fire your 18 shots, this will go all the way around, and once it's full, then you'll know that you can deploy your shield and it's available for you. So Yeah, it's a decent gun. It's accurate. It's got a decent rate of fire. It doesn't have much for recoil, and the seeking shot and the blocking capabilities of it are good. So it's a good gun. I like it. The Lightning Blast is another decent gun that is a lightning damage gun. So it's an elemental effect gun, which is nice. So it helps you. Lightning damage is probably one of the ones that a lot of people, at least amongst my friends, we have a hard time getting people to want to do lightning damage. Mostly because the lightning damage guns are kind of meh. This one's not bad, but it's still not great either. So there's better weapons out there that don't do lightning damage that a lot of people like to pick. But lightning damage is the best against shields, and especially when you get to the end boss, the Polar King, he has a very large shield, and if you don't have much lightning damage, trying to rip through his shield, especially on higher, harder difficulties, is very hard. So having somebody that's focused on a lightning damage weapon is good. This being one of them is not a terrible thing. My one beef with this gun is that the projectile speed is pretty slow. The balls that it fires move really slow, and it's sometimes you can think that you're going to hit somebody when you fire, and if they move, you miss because the projectiles don't go very fast. It does have a thing where it launches a force field sphere, and any projectile that you fire through the sphere gets more weapon damage, more projectile speed, and an effective range increase. So if you can hunker down in one spot and drop a force sphere and fire and be able to take things out, it helps this gun. But if you're moving around a lot and have to, which that's the other part of this game, you have to always be moving in this game. Like, standing still is not usually an option. And so that's one of the downsides to this gun, is you kind of have to drop in order to get the full effect of the gun, you have to kind of figure out a place where you can hunker down and fire without getting attacked. And so it's definitely not very useful in solo mode. It might be better in group play with your friends, but still, it's kind of a mid-range meh gun for me. It's not the greatest, it's not the best, but it's not the worst either. So it's just kind of a decent one. But yeah, my big complaint with this gun is that the projectile speed is really slow, and it because of that, you can often miss even when you're firing and thinking you're going to hit somebody. If they move, the projectiles will miss. The Big Hippo. This is a fun gun because, surprisingly, for a minigun that fires a lot of bullets really quickly, it doesn't have much recoil, and it's fairly accurate. The big problem I have with the Big Hippo is that when you're holding it, it slows you down a lot. So you're not moving nearly as fast. One of the things that I like getting with this gun is I like putting this on the dog in his offhand, because when he pulls it up, you get all the benefits of the the decent accuracy and the low recoil, but it doesn't affect his movement speed if it's brought up as his secondary weapon. So I don't mind that at all. So that's one aspect that I like using it in. Other than that, it's kind of a rough gun to use because, like I said, it makes you really slow, and in this game you want to be fast and moving. The faster you move and the more you move, the less likely you're going to get hit. So it's a hard one to utilize in that sense. But I have seen some people use it on the Bunny because it does have a decent rate of fire, and it ramps up the more you hold down the button, and it does have a really high base magazine, so it's good in that sense as well. So it's a okay weapon to use, but again, it's not the greatest because of that speed reduction that it gives you. So those are all of the rifles. So now we'll move on to the submachine guns. We'll go to the start of our. This again is a lightning damage weapon. Again, it's another one of those weapons that is not the greatest. It's a decent it's got a decent magazine and a decent rate of fire, It's kind of low damage-ish. It doesn't ever seem to do a ton for me. And the thing that I don't like about it is the way it reloads. You don't just have a quick reload a magazine. It recharges. So as soon as you stop firing, it will start reloading, but it reloads like it's winding a wheel and adding one bullet at a time to the thing. So if you drain it completely, it takes a lot longer to reload it than most other SMGs do when you drain them as well, because they're just switching out a magazine, whereas this has to rewind basically and recharge itself before firing. So that's why it's not really a great weapon for me. And it seems, every time I use it, it seems like it doesn't do very much damage. So it's not my favorite weapon. And again, it's another one of those weapons that lightning damage weapons are kind of lackluster in this game, in my opinion. So it's hard to justify using them. It's almost better to find a better weapon that does lightning damage than use one of the base lightning damage guns. So we'll move on to the next one. The Angelic Aura is a great weapon for certain characters. The bunny, the dog, because it does... it has one of the highest rate of fires in the game, and you can unload your magazine real fast. Its reload time is fairly quickly, and it does have a bit of recoil, but it's usually straight up when you're firing it. It doesn't go all over the place. It just climbs as you fire. So if you can compensate for that, or you just fire it in bursts, it's actually a very good gun. I quite like the Angelic Aura, but like if you look at this, like the damage of it is 60 per, and this is 34, so like it's way lower. The start of ours base damage is way lower. The Angelic Aura is a great gun. It's one of my favorite SMGs. I usually use it a lot if I get it, so that's the bulk of that one. It's a very good gun. If you get it, use it. The Dual Fang. This one is interesting. I love the way it reloads. For one, you kind of smack this little lizard and get him to reload his belly or whatever, because it spits. It's actually a fun gun to use. I don't mind it. The brief charge up that it has before firing is kind of annoying sometimes, but most of the time, if you're in a group and there's lots of enemies and you just hold down the fire button, it's not a big deal. You don't notice it as much. So it's actually a very good gun because it rotates between corrosion and fire damage every shot. It's actually a very handy gun to have, because it will give you two elemental damage effects. So it's a very good gun. I like it. It's definitely useful and definitely worthwhile using if you get one. Once you get used to the brief charge up, though, it doesn't even become a thing. But sometimes early on when you're first starting to use it, that brief charge up screws you up because you just want to fire like a short burst or something like that. Becomes kind of a pain in the butt. But other than that, it's a great weapon. Alright, the Demon Lore. This is one of the hardest weapons in the game to acquire. Excuse me. You have to defeat the big lobster guys in the third act with fire damage like 40 times in order to unlock this. But once you do, it's probably the best submachine gun in the game. It's a fire damage weapon. It has a good rate of fire, decent magazine. It's lower damage, but it increases its weapon damage on a critical hit. So every time you crit with it, it does more and more damage, and that resets when you reload or switch weapons. But if you can get this with some a higher magazine capacity and like something like Against the Flow, where you're automatically regaining ammo for it, so you don't have to reload, you don't ever drop your increased weapon damage on crit hits. So it becomes a really powerful, really good gun, and it's probably my favorite SMG next to the Angelic Aura. Like, they're both really good, and I'll use both of them quite regularly throughout the game. So, but again, like I said, it is the hardest weapon in the game to unlock, because You have to pretty much always be using fire damage when you get to the third act, and you fight most of the time throughout the entire third act, maybe 2 or 3 of the lobsters, um, and you have to kill 40 of them. So in order to unlock this gun, you almost have to run like 20, do 20 runs with fire damage, get to the third act, kill the lobsters, and then finish it and start over. So you have to do like 20 straight runs of fire damage weapons in order to unlock this thing. So it takes quite a while to unlock, even if you're focusing on that all the time. Because most of the time you're having fun. You're not going to strictly run fire damage weapons all the time. So it sometimes takes even longer to do. It was the last weapon I unlocked in the game. So, but it's a very good weapon and it's well worth trying to unlock it. All right, the scalpel. This is another decent gun. It's got good accuracy, not much recoil. You can switch it between single shot and double shot, where it uses up more ammo but does double damage. So it's really good in that sense. As if you have a way to mitigate your ammo usage, it's a great weapon in that sense. Like I said, the recoil and the accuracy on it are very good, so it's a very good gun as well. It's probably my third favorite SMG next to the Angelic Aura and the Demon Lore. So very, very good weapon. I highly recommend it. If you find you're having a hard time dealing damage with it, check to see if you're in single shot or double shot mode, and you might be able to pump up your damage if you're still only firing single shot. And you can put it into double shot, but you got to make sure you have a way to mitigate the extra ammo usage with it. But other than that, it's a great weapon. Concealed ammo is kind of a lackluster one. It's not bad, it's not great. It's kind of just in the middle. Its secondary rate of mode of fire is you throw the gun, or part of the gun's clip is actually a stick of dynamite, so you throw the remaining ammo in your clip at the enemy and it blows up like a grenade. So the most effective way to use this gun is to fire most of your rounds in your magazine, and then when you're down to like only a couple of rounds left, use the grenade portion of it and it'll auto reload, and you'll only use up 2 or 3 rounds, rather than if you just reload and then throw the magazine, you use up all of your rounds in your magazine. So like you'll throw out 28 rounds instead of, and I don't think it increases the damage any based on how much ammo you use to throw the grenade. I think it just always does a base damage. So it's not, like I said, it's not terrible, it's not great, it's just kind of in the middle. And that's the end of the submachine guns. So now we'll go to pistols. The pistols are a decent category of guns. One of the reasons why I like pistols is because they actually increase your movement speed when you're using them. So it helps you move fast. The Sunderer is one of my favorites if I'm using a pistol build, because it acts like a shotgun, where it has a lot of projectiles and they split multiple times when they fire. So it's like a pistol shotgun that doesn't slow you down, it actually speeds you up when you're using it. So if you can get a good one with good inscriptions on it, it's a very good gun to use. One of my favorite pistols out there, so it's quite handy. Other than that, yeah, that's all I got to say about it. It's a solid weapon and I recommend using it. Scorching Rounds is decent. It's the highest, one of the highest base damage pistols. I think it actually is the highest base damage pistol, and it has decent crit X and a decent rate of fire. It has a small mag, but if you get one that has faster reload time, it already has a decently fast reload time, but if you get one that has an inscription that increases the reload time on an empty mag, it reloads ridiculously fast, and you don't really ever have to worry about what you call it. You don't have to worry about reload. It doesn't make that much of a difference, and its bullets cause a small area explosions upon hitting enemies, so it does a bit of AoE damage as well. The nice thing about it as well is fire damage. If if you haven't seen any of my other videos or explained this, fire damage does a burning effect, which does a dot, which is damage over time, on enemies that get affected by the fire damage. And the damage over time is based on the base damage of the weapon. So the higher the base damage of the weapon, the more the burn does each tick of the burn. So that's why this weapon is pretty good in that sense too, because it has a high base damage. The burn damage it does is good as well. So it does a lot more burn damage. It's a decent gun. I like to bug my son about it because his one gripe about this weapon is that it doesn't auto fire like some of the other ones. If you hold down your fire button with some pistols, it'll just keep firing, whereas the scorching rounds you have to click every single time you want to fire, and he finds that annoying. So that's why he doesn't like it. But other than that, I think it's a good gun. And like I said, with pistols, it makes you move faster, which helps you stay alive more. So it's a decent gun. If you can get it buffed, it's definitely worth using. The Aura Venom. Both the previous gun, the Scorching Rounds, and the Aura Venom are decent accuracy as well. They don't have much spread in their fire, and they're fairly accurate as well, and don't have too much recoil when firing them. The Aura Venom is a decent weapon as well. It's decent base damage, decent crit X. Its rate of fire is a little slow. Well, not really a little slow, but it's the cool thing about it is if you right click with it, it will just empty. It will rapid fire all the remaining ammo in your magazine, and when you do that, it's got the fastest rate of fire in the game because it just unloads the 8-round magazine really, really quickly. And it's actually kind of cool if you use this gun with the Gemini ability that gives it a increased magazine. It becomes one of the better SMGs in the game, because if you match it with another weapon that has a high mag, it gives it, like, say you pair this with a big hippo that has an 80-round magazine. All of a sudden, this now has an 88-round magazine, and when you right-click, it just fires until all those rounds are gone, and it fires faster than any SMG in the game. So it's handy in that sense. And it does corrosion damage, which is a decent thing. Corrosion damage slows enemies, which is always good because it helps make them easier to hit when they're not moving as fast. So it's a decent weapon to use. I like it. It's not a bad gun at all. The Thunderstorm, and here we go again with yet another lightning damage weapon that is kind of lackluster. Of the three pistol-like weapons that do elemental damage, the Scorching Rounds, the Aura Venom, and now this is my least favorite. Its projectile is a little slower than the other ones. Lightning damage, apart from doing better damage with shields, lightning effect is not as noticeable in the game. It gives you increased damage with lightning damage on enemies that are shocked. But it doesn't, like, I don't know, maybe it's just me when I'm playing, it doesn't seem like it does that much more. Like, getting the doubling effects of the like, combining elemental effects, when you combine lightning with fire, or lightning with corrosion, or fire and corrosion, lightning seems to be the least effective one, at least in my opinion, when playing. So it's hard to say whether it's worth it or not, but it's definitely not my favorite gun. It is nice if you don't have an explosion type weapon. That is one thing that this gun does do, where if there are shielded enemies, like the horse heads in the first round, or the lizard guys that have a shield, you can charge and fire a lightning ball that detonates when it hits something, which will do AoE damage and will affect people behind their shields. So It's decent in that sense where if you don't have an AoE weapon or a penetrating weapon, it's good in that sense where it will help you in that regard. But again, it's not my favorite weapon. Other people might like it, but it's my least favorite of the of the three pistol type elemental guns. Um, it's okay, but it's not great. Talisman. This weapon is interesting. It's completely. I don't know anybody that uses it as a weapon. One of the things that I know a lot of I do sometimes, and what I've seen other content creators do, is they'll have this as their secondary weapon if they're playing an elemental build, and they want to be able to pick what elemental damage they do with their Gemini. So they'll Gemini it so that the two weapons share their elemental effects, and then with this, because it you can switch it between fire, corrosion, or lightning damage. You can just choose whichever additional lightning or additional elemental damage you want to do on your weapon. So it's a handy secondary weapon to have in that sense, but other than that, it's kind of a lackluster weapon. It doesn't do great damage, doesn't have great crit X, doesn't have great rate of fire. It's just kind of a meh weapon, but it does serve that purpose, and you can set it to whatever elemental damage you want to add to your other weapon that you're using. So that's what I generally use the talisman for, if I use it at all. Icy Spear. Okay, this is definitely an interesting weapon. Despite its name, it doesn't actually do elemental damage. It just does normal damage. It hurls a spear at a target, which will it will what do you call it? It will penetrate and keep going until it hits a floor or a wall. And then when it hits a floor or a wall, it will stay there and it will spin, and it will do damage to anybody that's in that area while it's spinning. So if you happen to throw it at something and it's right beside it, it will keep hitting them for damage as it spins. And then it's so you can keep throwing these out, and a bunch of them will accumulate on the ground. And then your secondary fire is wherever you're aiming. If you right click, all of the ones that you have out on the ground will retract back to you and will go through the point that you're aiming at. So it's a decent way to get crits on bigger targets, because it will penetrate through them initially and then come back and crit on the way back as well. It's a decent weapon to use, and it's actually kind of fun. So it's a decent weapon. I don't mind it. And it penetrates shields, so it's good for going against shielded enemies. Yeah, it's a decent weapon. I don't mind it. Yeah, it's a decent one. That's all I can say. It's a decent weapon. It's useful. If you like it, use it. If you don't like it or you find it hard to use, there's other weapons that you can utilize. But it is a decent weapon that is helpful. Cloud Weavers. These are interesting. So these are a new weapon that were introduced with the DLC that the monkey and the fox came out in. They go out and they kind of just follow your pointer and deal damage to wherever you're aiming. They do a lot of damage. They're kind of fun to use. They're definitely interesting. What can I say? They're good. They're really good. If you get a good set, they're fun to use. They go out. The only problem that sometimes happens is if you're aiming out and somebody's running at you, it's sometimes hard to get them to come back to, like, if you're shooting at, like, say in the first level, there's crossbowmen or something like that you're getting them to kill in the background, and a spear guy or a swordman come running at you, trying to get them to retarget and come and kill that spear guy that's running at you is sometimes tricky to do. That's my only negative for them. But other than that, they're great. They do surprisingly lots of amounts of damage. I don't fully understand how their ammo works on them when they go out. but they just seem to work, and it works out nicely. So they're a decent they're a decent weapon. I like them and would recommend people trying them out. They're fun to use. Okay, the Prism. This is the start of the 3 kunai. The Prism is interesting. In one of my videos I mentioned that because what it does is it pierces monsters and bounces off of barriers. So when you start throwing these out, you'll see a whole bunch of green lines bouncing all over the place in rooms, going from place to place. But I rarely see them actually hit anything when it's bouncing. So like occasionally you'll see it do extra damage to stuff, but not usually that much. They're decent damage, decent crit, decent rate of fire weapon. They're not bad, but they're not fantastic either. It's a corrosion weapon, so it gives you that slowing effect as well, so it's not too bad to use. Yeah, they're alright. The Glimmering is probably, in my opinion, worse than the Prism. It's supposed to stick to enemies that were hit and then explode, so they do explosion damage, but they're not as good, I think, as the Prism. The Prism bouncing seems to do a little bit better than the explosions of the Glimmering. The Glimmering it's alright. It's not the greatest, but it's also not a bad weapon. They're all elemental damage weapons too, so they work well with, like the cat uses them really well because he wants to do elemental damage and having the additional effects. The Glimmering works well for him. But there's other fire damage weapons that are better, so if you're just wanting it for the fire effect, a Demon Lower or a Crimson Fire Scale is a better option, or even a Scorching Rounds in my opinion, because it has a higher base damage, only 5 damage more, but it's still a higher base damage. But it's not terrible. If you pick it up, it's a serviceable weapon that you can use until you find something better if you happen to get one. So yeah, that's what I think about the Glimmering. The Arclight is probably my favorite of the kunai, and probably my favorite lightning damage weapon in the game. If I'm playing with a group of friends and I'm in charge of doing the lightning damage, this is the weapon that I like to use. You inflict lightning damage that automatically attacks nearby enemies. Every 4 hits with lightning grants 1 use of Dagger Fan. Cast a fan of daggers, marking hit enemies, inflicting 2 extra lightnings when the dagger or lightning hits a marked enemy. So as you throw out your kunai, you can hit your secondary button and it throws out a fan of daggers that mark enemies hit, and then you inflict extra lightning damage when a dagger or a lightning hits that marked enemy. So once you throw out your fan, if you hit somebody, you can throw out more and do more damage with it. So it's a fun weapon to use. I like it. It's probably my favorite of, it's definitely my favorite of the kunai, and it's my favorite of the lightning damage weapons that are available. So yeah, it's a decent weapon. Use it if you find it. It's fun. Try it out. See what you like. See if you like it for yourself. And then the Foundry is the last pistol. It's your basic weapon that you get all the time. Doesn't use ammo, and it's just your basic weapon that you have to use at the beginning of the game if you until you find a weapon. So it's just meh. There's not much to say about the Foundry. Alright, so that was pistols. Now we'll go to shotguns. Alright. So the Hell is probably my favorite close range shotgun. If I'm playing the turtle or the bird and I'm building defensively with them, I like using a Hell. It does piercing damage, and it has an interesting reload where it will reload 1 shell at a time, but you can interrupt the reload at any time as long as there's a bullet in the gun. So you can keep firing and reload, fire, reload, fire, reload, and just keep doing that if you want, or you can let it reload all the way up to full and then fire after that. It does decent damage, fires lots of projectiles. It's a good close range weapon. that pierces. So I quite like it. It's a decent gun. Like I said, it doesn't have very good range, in my opinion, so it's not the best for a ranged character, but for a character that's building defensive that you want to be in the fight with, like the bird or the turtle, it's definitely a worthwhile gun to take into consideration. So I quite like it. The illusion is probably my single favorite weapon in the game. It does a lot of damage. It has decent range. It's a automatic shotgun that increases your rate of fire as you hold it down and fires more projectiles as you hold it down. It's a great weapon, and I recommend anybody use it anytime you get one if it's better than what you're using, because yeah, I don't know what to say about this gun other than it's my favorite weapon in the game. It's fantastic on anyone. Any character can use this weapon very effectively. Yeah, I don't know. It's my favorite gun. That's all I have to say. Great weapon. Use it a lot. It's fantastic. End of story. My favorite weapon in the game. The Argus is kind of a niche gun. It fires a horizontal stream of projectiles that knock back enemies if they're hit. And it says if enemies hit any barrier on their way back, they will receive additional damage. So if you knock them into a wall, they'll take extra damage, or knock them into a railing or something like that. So it's an interesting gun. It's got a decent rate of fire and a decent amount of damage for a shotgun. And the knockback effect is kind of interesting to use. So it's not a terrible gun, but it's not, like, in my opinion, it's not better than the Illusion at farther range or rate of fire issues, and it's not better than the Hell at close range. So I'd rather use either of these over this one. But if I don't have access to those two and I want a shotgun build, like the Bird has decent synergy with shotguns, that it's not a bad weapon to use for the Bird either, because it can help knock people back and kind of give you a bit of crowd control in that sense. But it's not fantastic. So it's another one of those middle tier guns that's just, if you want to use it and you like it, use it. It's not a bad gun, but it's not the best gun out there either. So the Pupil. This is probably my second favorite. Or would it be second favorite or first favorite? It's a lightning. This is probably, actually, now that I think about it, this is probably my favorite lightning gun over the kunai. It's a good charging a shot increases accuracy, and when fully charged increases the damage. It's a lightning damage gun, and it's a good mid-range shotgun that can fire accurately and do precision firing, or you can just keep firing it quickly if close range to do a lot of damage. And again, it's a lightning damage weapon, so it's good against shields, and it helps out against bosses that are shielded, especially the end boss. If you get it with extra projectiles or penetrating or something like that, it's a very good weapon to have. It's, again, one of my more favorite guns if I'm playing, say, the turtle or even the monkey. The turtle, the monkey, the cat. Somebody that doesn't really care that much about rate of fire. Like the dog and the bunny really want to focus on rate of fire builds. That's why I wouldn't use it on them. But it's very good on any character that just wants to do some lightning damage, and it's a decent mix of mid-range and close-range weapon. So it's a good gun. It's one of the better shotguns too. Yeah, I like it. It's a good gun. Recommend. The Wild Hunt. Okay, so this is a very interesting weapon. I don't like this gun on anyone other than the dog, and only in a very specific build for the dog. I like this gun as the secondary gun that you pull up when dual wielding with the dog. When you combine it with a magazine, the Gemini that increases its magazine and rate of fire, because it becomes what I call a lawnmower, where you pull it, you dual wield, you pull up this thing, and you just have to keep clicking. And because you have a higher magazine, you don't have to reload it constantly like it has to normally with only 2 rounds in the magazine, and you can just keep firing over and over and over. And the when you pull it up as a secondary weapon for the dog, it doesn't have recoil. That's the big problem with this gun when you use it normally, is it has a lot of recoil, and it's hard to manage the recoil on it sometimes. So that's why I don't really like this weapon on anyone other than the dog when you're doing a dual wield build with the dog. Even the bird that likes to do close range, or the turtle that likes to do close range, I would much rather use a Hell than one of these, because of the 2 rounds and the recoil on it. I find the Hell is much better in close than this is, because you're constantly reloading it unless you give it the magazine upgrade, but then it's still, the recoil on it is rough. So yeah, the Wild Hunt is, for me, it's a really fun gun to use on one particular character in one particular situation, which is the dog. Other than that, I'm not a fan of it. Porcupine. Porcupine is a fun, corrosion damage weapon that's, the projectiles on it scatter all over the place, and they hit a lot of things, and it does a ton of AoE damage. It's not as good for for accuracy, but if you're just trying to clear a room of a lot of enemies, the Porcupine is a great weapon for that. It does a decent amount of damage, it fires 21 projectiles that do 24 damage each, so it's a high damage weapon. And because it's corrosion, because it hits so many people, it slows like everybody. So it's a fun weapon to use, especially if you're in a group of people. It's great for like the monkey, or the monkey, the bird, the monkey, the bird, or the turtle. I think really utilize this gun well if they want to. It's a quite fun gun to use. So yeah, I recommend it. Trying it out, see if you like it. It's definitely a preferred. It's definitely got an interesting playstyle around it, is what I'll say. But it's a good gun. It's fun to use. Now the wheel saw I haven't used too much because it just came out recently, so I don't know a ton about it just yet. It's if all projectiles / attacks in a shot / weapon skill hit the enemy, the next weapon skill will be enhanced. Okay, so if you hit all of your projectiles when you fire this gun at something, then the next one will enhance the weapon skill. And then the other thing about it is you deal weapon damage to an area ahead of you while reloading. So the saw blade comes up and spins while you're reloading it, and will kind of deal close range damage if somebody's trying to hit you, like if a spearman or a swords guy or something like that comes at you while you're reloading. It'll do some damage to them. But other than that, I haven't really used it too much, so I don't know if I like it or not. I really should try it out a little bit more in a run next time I see one. But it seems interesting is all I can say. And that's the end of the shotguns. So now we go on to the snipers. Alright. Piercing Flame is one of my favorite sniper rifles. Because it pierces, for one, so it goes through shields. It has a high base damage, so its fire damage that it inflicts will do good damage, good burn damage when using it. It has a decent aiming magnification when you're using the scope. It's got a 5-round mag, and it fires quite fast for a sniper rifle. The reload on it isn't as bad. Why that makes sense will be more prevalent here in a minute when I get to another weapon, but as far as this weapon goes, it's a good weapon. Can't go wrong with it if you're playing the Tiger as a sniper build. Or the other person that it's surprisingly good with is the Cat, because the Cat has explosion grenades, or corrosion grenades I should say, that deal corrosion damage, and then when you fire this gun that has a high base damage of fire damage, the explosion damage that the mixture of corrosion and fire do is also based on the damage of the fire damage weapon. So it does a lot of good explosion damage when you're using this. So the Cat can use this quite well as well, to good effect, and it's a good weapon to use for the Cat or the Tiger, in my opinion. I don't really know if anybody else really likes sniper rifles too much. They're kind of, again, this game is all about moving fast and being mobile, and stopping to aim with a sniper rifle is usually a luxury you don't have. You have to be really good at quick scoping things to shoot them and keep moving a lot. If you get good at that, or you've done that a lot in other first-person shooters, then you'll like the snipers in this game, but if you don't, they're kind of a hindrance, and some of the other weapons will be better for you. But other than that, it's a good sniper rifle. The double caliber is an interesting one. Every time you shoot it, it consumes 2 ammo. If both shots cause crit hits, you return those 2 shots back to the mag. So if you crit hit with it, it replenishes its ammo, so it's decent in that sense. It's got a decent base damage and a decent crit X, but for me the problem with this gun is it doesn't penetrate. It doesn't pierce shields, so that's why I don't really love it. It's not bad, but it's not fantastic either. So it's an okay sniper rifle. It's not the best, but it's not the worst either. If you get it as the Tiger's probably the only one that would want to use this. And yeah, it's just not as good as some of the other snipers, so you're not going to use it as often. The Goshawk is an interesting one where it takes a sec to fire. It does a high amount of damage, but you have to get used to the way it fires. You aim, or depending on whether you scope or whether you're just shooting it normally, you have to press your fire button and it will charge for a second before firing. So you have to get used to that effect when you're using it. If you can get used to that effect and you can utilize it well, it does do a lot of damage. But again, it doesn't pierce, and it doesn't have any elemental effect on it, so it's not my favorite. And because of the charge up time on it and having to wait for it to charge before hitting, it's sometimes slow to hit things, and it's not as effective as other weapons, so it's not my favorite. The Woodpecker. This one is actually very fun to use. It's got a high base damage, decent magazine, and a really fast rate of fire, but you have to keep clicking. It's not automatic. You have to keep clicking. That's why they call it the Woodpecker, because you keep hearing the click, 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 click of your mouse every time you fire it. But it's got a scope. It does a decent amount of damage. It has a decent crit X. It fires fairly quickly. So it's a fun gun to use for a sniper rifle. I quite enjoy it if I get it. It works on a bunch of different people because of the higher rate of fire. But it doesn't have any base elemental damage on it, so that's one of the negatives for it. But other than that, it's a good gun. I like it. It's fun to use. Try it out. The Golden Bow. So the Golden Bow, the longer the weapon charges, the higher the weapon's damage and crit X will be. So if you're holding your arrows, the base weapon and base crit X are 200 and 2.5, but the longer you hold it, you'll charge that up, and it'll increase. I don't know what the maximum it increases to. I should really look into that. But it's decent. I have a hard time using the bows in this game, so I don't usually use them because I'm not the best at aiming them is probably my big problem. But if you enjoy the bows, it is a decent bow to use. It can do a lot of damage if you get it upgraded and you're good at charging it and firing with the sniper and with the crit X increases for it. So it's yeah, it's a decent bow, but I'm not very good at it, so I don't use it all that often. Alright, now here is what I was talking about with the piercing flame. The bloody drill is the other penetrating sniper rifle in the game. It fires a bullet that will penetrate and will cause a bleeding effect, which is based on the weapon's damage, which will continuously drain people's hit points once they've been affected by bleeding. My big problem with this gun is every time you fire a shot, it has a long cycle where you have to recock and reload the rechamber the next shell. If you know anything about regular guns, every time you fire this weapon you have to rechamber around and get it ready to fire the next shot, and it's slower than any of the other sniper rifles that are available, and that's my one beef with this gun. If it didn't have that slow rechambering effect for the weapon, I would love it. But as it stands, I like the piercing flame better than the bloody drill because it doesn't have that rechambering fire effect when you fire it. That's my one beef with this gun. One of my friends loves it. He says it's his favorite weapon in the game, but that's just the one thing that I can't get over is the rechambering of it. So that is what it is, and we'll move on to the next one. It's still a decent gun though. Like I said, I should say it's got a decent crit X, a decent damage. It does the bleeding effect and it penetrates, so it's nice to have this as like a backup weapon sometimes if you run into shields, so you can just pull it out and shoot through the shields, crit hit them, and move on without having to try and get around them. So it can be a decent weapon, but it's not my favorite sniper rifle because of that chambering effect of the round. The Sting, this one's weird. I'm not a fan of it. The way it fires, what do you call it? It fires 3 sets of arrows before reloading. So the first 2 just fire normally, and then the third one creates a big explosion when it fires the last shot before it reloads. It seems to do okay, but I don't know. There's just something about it, the way it fires, the way it works, that I'm not a fan of. So I don't usually use it that much. It is a corrosion damage sniper rifle, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It's not my favorite. It's definitely not my favorite sniper rifle. I don't use it all that often. It kind of fires weird in my opinion. I think some people might like it, but I'm not a fan of it. So I rate it as kind of a meh gun in my opinion. It's not great. I don't use it all that often. Okay, the Strike Wing. This is a good bow. Again, if you're good with using bows, it's a very good bow. After hitting an enemy, 3 additional arrows will be launched at other enemies behind the initial target, so it splits and seeks to 3 other enemies, so it does a lot of good damage and a lot of good AoE damage. The other bonus about this weapon in particular is it has the highest base crit X of any weapon in the game. So if you're building a sniper build, especially with the Tiger, if you want a high crit X, one of the things that you can do is use this as your secondary weapon if you don't want to use it as your primary, but get the Gemini effect that allows them to share their crit X, and then this will give your other weapon another ×5 crit X. So you can almost get it up to ×10. Usually it's like about ×9.5. Like I'll switch back to the, I'll go back to the, like the Piercing Flame has a ×4 crit X, and most of the other ones have ×4. So if you use the Strike Wing with a Piercing Flame, you're doing 9 times crit X whenever you crit something. So headshotting people does a lot more damage. So it's a good weapon to use in that sense. And it is, again, a very good weapon if you're good with bows. I'm not good with bows. I miss a whole lot whenever I'm firing with bows. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the projectile speed or the tracking of it or something, but I seem to miss a lot when I use bows, so I don't usually use them. But if you're good with bows and you can hit people with them, it's a great weapon to use. It's fantastic. The splitting off and hitting additional people when you hit is great. So it does AoE. So yeah, it's a good weapon. I just can't use it for shit, so I don't. And now the last one. This is the new lightning damage sniper rifle that came in with the DLC. It's okay, it's not great. I don't like it too much. It has a decent crit X at 4.5 and decent damage, and it doesn't have the racking or the is it racking effect or chambering effect that the Bloody Drill does, but it doesn't penetrate. It does shooting a teammate deploys a damage blocking shield. So if you shoot one of your teammates with it, you will give them a shield. So that's handy if you're playing with friends, but if you're not playing with friends, it's not as handy. And then damage being blocked or causing no scope crit hits gains charges. Scope shots consume charges for enhanced shots with higher crit X. So it is interesting, but I don't know. I've used it on a few runs with the Tiger, and it's not. I don't know. I find the Piercing Flame to be a better sniper rifle than this one. So, but to each their own. It's not too bad, but it's not fantastic in my opinion. It's just kind of meh. So that's my thoughts on the Lightning Kasana. All right, now we get into launchers. So, Tiger Cannon. Tiger Cannon is a high damage launcher that does a good explosion AoE damage that do lots of AoE damage. The problem with it is it only has one magazine, so you're always constantly reloading every time you fire a shot. But it's a decent launcher. If you can get a higher magazine or have it share magazine capacity, it does pretty well, because then it has a higher rate of fire and more magazine capacity, and you don't have to keep reloading it every single time you shoot. But even then, for like an explosion dog build or the monkey, having a launcher is a decent weapon. Even the bird can sort of make use with launchers with one of his abilities. The same one that I use normally with shotguns, you can technically use with launchers because you're hitting multiple people with one shot. So it's decent in that regard, but it's still not my favorite launcher. It's decent, but it's not amazing. The Frenzied Shark is how do I put this? Frenzied Shark is tied for probably worst gun in the game with another launcher that's coming up. So the bouncing bullets seem to miss a lot and don't explode when they fire. It's I don't know. It's kind of meh is my point about this. The bullets fire like I think it's Junkrat in Overwatch. He has those bouncing grenades that he fires, where he lobs and they just kind of go everywhere. But they don't seem to blow up or hit as much, and they just seem to roll past people a lot of the times, in my opinion. And it's quite possibly the worst or the second worst gun in the game, in my opinion. So I don't ever use a Frenzied Shark. It's not great. I don't like it, and we'll just move on from there. You can try it if you want to, but I find it's not very useful at all. Shrieker. Shrieker is a fun weapon. You can use it from long range or from close range. It charges and you can hold your blast before you fire it. It looks like it should be doing lightning damage, but it's not. It's just an explosion damage. It guarantees critical explosion damage after hitting a weak spot. hitting a barrier causes a massive explosion. So if you hit a wall or a railing or something like that with it, it does a bigger explosion. So it's a decent gun. It's fun to use. It's not a bad gun at all. It's useful. My big problem with launchers as well is kind of the same along the same lines as the Big Hippo, is they slow you down when you use them. They make you move slower, and that's a negative in this game because you want to always be moving fast. So that's usually why I don't use launchers when I'm playing by myself. But if playing with friends and you want to do a lot of AoE damage, this is a good weapon and it's fun to use. So I would recommend it. The Bone Dragon. This is another one that's interesting. It kind of acts again like another weapon from Overwatch, where I think it's Brigitte fires a almost like a black hole that sucks people in so that they can't move and then explodes, and does a decent amount of damage. It's good for crowd control. It does a decent amount of damage. The only problem with it is it doesn't explode right away when you fire it, so it takes some time, and if you miss, people can still get around it. But it's a decent weapon. It's fun to use with friends. Again, it helps with crowd control. If you've got a lot of people and you fire a black hole in and suck all of them in and blow up, it does a lot of AoE damage. So it's a good weapon to have. It's not terrible, but it's not fantastic either. And the Justice. So this is the other weapon with the Frenzied Shark that is tied or worst weapon in the game, in my opinion. It throws grenades that can be manually detonated. So you fire the grenades and then you right click to have them blow up. And you can have up to 4 grenades out at the same time and then blow them up when you're using it. My big problem with this gun is its range is terrible. If you want to throw it anywhere, you have to like lob these things out and like aim way high up at the top of the screen just for it to go any distance at all. It's probably like there are so many other guns that are so much better that I never use this gun, hardly ever. I think I've only used it once or twice on video, just to kind of showcase how bad it is why I used it. But so it's definitely not my favorite gun. It's definitely one of the worst guns in the game, in my opinion. They could really, I don't know, do something to help this gun out somehow. I'm not sure how, but yeah, I don't know. It's bad. I don't like it. The Deafening Mortar is probably my favorite launcher in the game. It has a 3-round magazine. It does good close range and good long range. If you're close range, it fires, when you primary fire it, it just fires like an AoE explosion right in front of you. So if you're close in, it's good on the bird or the turtle. If you're wanting to go in and be in the middle of a fight and surrounded by people and just let these off close range, it does a ton of damage. And then its secondary fire is you hold down the secondary fire and it gives you an arc and it'll show you where it's going to land, and then you let go and it'll lob 3 shells at wherever you're firing. So it does have some long range capabilities. It's not just a short range weapon, so it is a very helpful and versatile weapon. Again, my only beef with all launchers is that they slow you down, and that's usually not a good thing when you're playing in the higher difficulties of this game. So, that's the end of the launchers. Now we get to injectors. These are my least favorite weapons in the game. The Fire Glove, or Laser Gloves as it should, is a spray weapon, shoots a laser that deals increasing damage on the same target. So the more you target one enemy, it does more damage to them. So it's probably in my opinion, it's the better of any of them because it's good at fighting single targets. And in my opinion, in this game, especially when you're playing by yourself, if you're playing with friends, it's not as big of a deal. You don't have to worry about trying to solo kill anything because you've got friends around, obviously. So this, when you're playing by yourself, in my opinion, is the better of the gloves, because it ramps up increased damage on the same target. Because the hardest part of playing this game when you're playing by yourself is killing bosses. If you have weapons that do a lot of AoE damage and do a lot of damage to multiple people, that does not help you against bosses. It's actually a hindrance. So this is a decent, of the injectors, it's one of the better ones against bosses, and so in my opinion it's my favorite of the gloves, but it's still not that great. There are a ton of other weapons I would rather have, and they seem to burn, because they have a high rate of fire and a lower magazine, they burn through ammo so quickly, it's not even funny. But it's not terrible. They're also really good. The one really good point about this one and the lightning one is that they're pinpoint accurate. Like, if you're good at aiming and you know where you want to hit something, they will hit it no matter what. So that's one bonus to them, is that they're pinpoint accurate. This is the lightning glove, and the fire glove are also very good on the cat, because you can throw out your corrosion grenades and then get lightning or fire damage on them pinpoint accurately to get your bonus elemental effects going. So it's a decent weapon on the cat, and on the bunny too, because it's high rate of fire, and on the dog if you're doing a rate of fire build, but I'd still rather have an SMG in my opinion anyway. But it's the better of the three elemental gloves in my opinion. So we'll move on now. The Thunderclap glove, this one does less damage, but it spreads from one target to another on a hit. So if you're fighting groups of clustered enemies, it does AoE damage to everyone around in a cluster, which is good. But like I said, when you're fighting a boss, it just seems to do lackluster damage in my opinion, because it's got a low base damage and you're not spreading any damage to anybody else, you're just trying to hit the boss, so it doesn't work as well. On the cat, it works really well because you're getting the miasma effect, which is a ticking dot that happens all the time. So it's not terrible, and it does have a higher magazine than the laser glove, but in my opinion I like the laser glove better than the Thunderclap glove. But that's just me. My son completely disagrees with me. He thinks this is the best weapon in the game on the cat and will always get it if he can. So it's personal preference, but in my opinion it's not as good of a weapon as the other one. The rainbow. Okay, so this is how do I put it? It's an interesting weapon. It will, you fire a ray that will auto-lock on a nearby enemy, but it doesn't auto-lock on their head or their critical spot unless you launch a mark, and then the ray will mark on that, or the ray will lock onto the mark. So if you hit them with the mark, you can crit, but for the most part it just hits them in a base weak, or a base in the chest, basically is what it does. It auto-locks on their main body and does damage. So it's hard to crit with this weapon. And because of that, I don't like it that much. It seems to do lackluster damage in my opinion. I've seen videos where people think that the rainbow is the best weapon in the game because it sprays and it just tracks wherever. You don't have to aim. You can just run through holding the button and killing enemies if you get a good one that does a lot of damage. So there is that to be said about it, but I don't know. Every time I've used it, I've been less than impressed about the way how much damage it does. So that's my beef with it. So yeah, that's all I can say about it. It's not the greatest weapon in my opinion, but some people really like it, so give it a shot, see if you like it. And yeah, so that's how that goes. The fire dragon. So the fire dragon is how do I put this? It's a really good weapon for close range people. So if you're building a build where you want to be in the middle of the fight, like if you're building a dog build that's got a lot of health and wants to be in the thick of things, if you're building a turtle build, if you're building a bird build where you want to jump in and do a lot of damage, this is a very good weapon for that, but it's not great for people who want to be long range and out of the fight because it has a short range. It does a ton of damage, it has a high rate of fire, has a decent magazine. My other beef with this freaking gun is it reloads so slowly. Like, it takes forever to reload once it's out of ammo. Having skateboarder or some way to mitigate the reload so that you don't ever have to reload it will help. But in my opinion, it's only really good for close range people. But if you are a close range person and you want to do fire damage, it's a really good weapon because it just burns everything in its path, and it's good in that sense. But it's not so good on the cat usually unless you're building a defensive cat build, but it's really hard to build the cat defensively, I find. At least I find, in my opinion. But it's better, in my opinion, on the bird, the dog if you're building him survivable, or the turtle because you want to go in and be in the middle of the fight with those guys. So it's a decent weapon on them. But you definitely do have to get something to mitigate this 2.5 second reload time, because 2.5 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're in the middle of a firefight in the game and you're waiting 2.5 seconds before you can fire again, it seems like forever. Now, this is the newest glove, one of the new weapons that came out with the DLC. I don't like it that much because it acts like the rainbow, where it will auto lock on nearby enemies, and so it will fire. It's hard to crit with it because it auto locks on enemies, and it's got this weird mini game that you have to play with it, where when you look at your reticle on the screen, there's lines that are moving in, and there's two wide sections on the line that it's moving into, and there's lines that light up when they get into that middle section. If you activate it when those are lit up, then you'll fire an enhanced laser, and enemies hit by an enhanced laser will refract the laser to 3 nearby enemies within 6 meters. So you'll spread your lasers to other people. So it has the potential to do good AoE damage, but I don't like it because it auto locks, and it has a hard time crit. Like, you won't get much for crits with it. So that's one of the reasons why I don't like it. I don't like weapons that can't auto crit. So yeah, I'm not a fan, or not auto crit. What I should say is not be able to utilize your own aim to get a crit hit. You just kind of hold it and hope that it does enough damage to kill something. So that's my downside to it. So all right. So that's the gloves. So now the last level, or the last type of weapon in the game, are the melee weapons. So there's 3 swords. In my opinion, the fire tower is the best one because it is the highest damage. It's the slowest to swing, but it does the most damage. So it trucks people really well, does a lot of damage, hits hard. It's great on the bird or the turtle, in my opinion, because they want to be in close and fighting in the middle of everything. It's terrible on the dog because you can't dual wield it, so you never want to use it on the dog, but the turtle and the bird can use it fairly well, and I've seen some people use it on the cat to do a lot of damage because, like I said, burn damage is based on base weapon damage. So this is the highest base weapon damage in the game, if I remember correctly, with 700, so it does a lot of burn damage when you hit things with it. And then when you to get some range with it, if you secondary fire it, it launches like a wheel of fire at something, but it's a slow traveling arcing shot that you have to fire at something, and it's hard to hit with it sometimes. If it's a big target that doesn't move very much, you can usually hit it with it, but it's kind of a pain in that sense. The downside to swords, in my opinion, in this game is when you're fighting bosses, you usually don't want to be right up and close to fighting a boss because they will hit you hard, and no matter how defensively built you are, they can chunk you down really easily. And so you want a good ranged weapon when fighting bosses. This is a great weapon for clearing enemies and fighting just regular enemies throughout all the levels. But when it comes time to fighting the boss, the melee weapons are hard to utilize against bosses, in my opinion. I would much rather have one of these as my weapon for when fighting regular guys, and then buff a good ranged weapon to fight the boss. Like on the bird, I usually like to have one of these and then an illusion. If I'm going to try and win the game as best I can and try for a high difficulty run, I'll throw one of these on the bird because they make you move fast too. That's the other thing that swords do, is they give you a 30% movement increase. Having a sword on the bird, going through and killing all the lowly enemies in the game is fantastic, and then having an illusion that you buff for when you're fighting longer ranged enemies or the boss is my favorite way to play the bird. And same with the turtle. Unless you're going for a punch build with the turtle, then having the melee weapon is really good because your punch damage is based on how fast you're moving, so having a sword is really good. So that's basically my opinion on them. They're better for the bird and the turtle, and sometimes the monkey, because the monkey gets a bonus when he uses his E with a sword, but not even as much, because the monkey, surprisingly, unless you get really into his weapon tree and get some of his defensive stuff, he's quite squishy. So you don't really want to be in close with the monkey as much. The bird and the turtle are much more defensive oriented than the monkey. So, but some people use this on the cat. I'm not sure how, but they do. I always end up dying whenever I use this with the cat, but it is what it is. Alright, Flowing Light. This is the lightning damage sword. It does, when you use the secondary ability on it, it thrusts the sword forward 5 times and does a little bit more range than its basic attack. It swings quickly, so it does a decent amount of damage, and it moves fast, but I find it doesn't do nearly as much damage as the Fire Tower. I find the Fire Tower does way more damage and kills things so much easier. The Flowing Light, I find, doesn't do enough damage for a melee weapon, in my opinion. Some people like it, some people use it more. It's completely personal preference, but in my opinion, I like the Fire Tower better than the Flowing Light and the Poison Ghost. This, like I said, this is the only sword. The other 2 swords have a way to fire a decent range. The thrusts do a bit more longer range than your basic slash, but not much. So it's still a completely close range weapon 100%. So if you are going to use it, you want to have a good backup weapon for range against bosses, in my opinion. But if you figured out a way to fight bosses using melees, which I've seen some people do, I just find it really hard because you've got to be really good at dodging their attacks and not getting hit, because they'll truck you no matter how defensively oriented you are. But it's a decent weapon, usable by, again, the bird or the turtle, in my opinion. And yeah. And last but not least, the Poison Ghost. This is the corrosion sword. Oh, I forgot to mention, this one does lightning damage too. So it's probably one of the other decent lightning damage afflicting weapons out there, but it's still not the greatest. Poison Ghost does corrosion damage, swings really fast, does less damage than the other 2, and whenever you hit something, you get a +1 wave charge up to 12 times, and when you have enough charges, you can use your secondary fire to throw a wave of corrosion at people that penetrates enemies. So that's its ranged ability, but you have to hit people with it first in order to charge that up. So that's why it's not as reliable, in my opinion, as the Fire Tower, because the Fire Tower's ranged attack you can just do. It just costs ammo, and you don't have to charge it, or you don't have to hit things or charge it up in any way to get the ranged attack. This one, if you've killed all the close range enemies and you've got ranged enemies you have to fight, you can't just throw the poison spray out with it. You have to have something to have hit with it. By the way, all swords have a magazine size from 1 to 10 to 15, and those are only for the secondary fire abilities of each sword. Swinging a sword just normally by attacking does not use up ammo. It's only when you use the secondary fire of these weapons that you use ammo. So in my opinion, the fire tower is the better of the 3 swords, but some people like the poison ghost as well. I'm just not as big of a fan of it. I like the fire tower the best. So there you have it. That is every single weapon in the game. I've kind of explained which ones I like, why, what they all do. If you guys enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you then, or see you then. Thanks. Bye.